Uh, okay, we have a lot of people from overseas, it seems. So, hi, Dr. Anjali. Hi, Fatima from UKM. Hi, Annapurna from India. Oh, wow. Hi, Vinny Sawan from Mumbai. Join us. We're still waiting a bit. So feel free to still introduce yourself. We are still taking more people, waiting just a bit and setting up a bit. So feel free to mingle around with everybody. We have a lot of people here. Preeti is asking, is anybody from psychology background? Anybody? We also have Dr. Kirti from Pune, India, Dr. Damayanti from Mumbai. Oh, wow. We also on YouTube, we also have quite a number of people from UNISA. Dr. We have John Tang from UNISA, Nasuha from UNISA, Fahmi also from UNISA. Wow, we have quite a number of people from UNISA here. Hi, people from UNISA. Excellent. All right. So joining with me also is Dian from UKM and Kee Man from Unimas. So well, you guys can introduce yourself right now.
Oh,
All
okay.
right. Kee Man, would you like to go first?
You can go first, ladies first.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Atikah. Welcome, welcome everyone. Hello. Hi, I'm Dian from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. I've been with UKM for more than 10 years. I'm attached to teaching at the Faculty of Information Science and Technology. So I'm teaching information systems related courses at UKM. I am like so many of you right now, my fellow colleagues, my fellow educator colleagues, a novice at teaching online fully. And I have to be honest on that. And I too am struggling in navigating through redesigning my courses, my teaching, to be in a shape that's fit for full online mode, especially in this current situation. So I'm very, very looking forward to our discussion here today to share ideas, to learn ways to make effective learning activities, particularly in an online setting. So to you, Kee Man.
Hey. Hi everyone, I'm Chuah Kee Man. My full name is Chuah Kee Man. You can call me Kee Man. I'm the Deputy Director of Teaching Excellence at Center for Applied Learning and Multimedia, University Malaysia Sarawak, one of the universities in Borneo, Malaysia. I've been teaching for more than 10 years as well, in e-learning for about 12 years. I think as we go, we know that, you know, technology changes a lot, so we have to keep up to date with the recent trends and all that. So I think even though we have so many years of experience in dealing with tools, every year is a new year, I think. So we learn a lot of new things every year. So I hope we can share some tips and best practices among each other, and we can help each other to go through this online teaching, you know, experience.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, thank you, Kee Man and Dian. So before we start, let me introduce myself first. I am Atikah. I am a learning designer and trainer from Open Learning. So I'll be moderating this session for today. So before we start, just a bit housekeeping. If you have any questions for the people in Zoom, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. And for people in YouTube, you can always ask us questions too, our team is there to navigate through. So feel free to ask any questions anytime. We will get back to you on the questions and ask and try to answer the questions as best as we can. Okay, so okay, let's start then. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's 11, so it's nearly noon, but still morning. Okay, so in today's session, Kee Man and Dian are going to share their experiences on designing online learning. So they will also be sharing their experiences and other educator pain points on how designing online learning activities. So we will go through this in a bit. But in between that, you can ask questions anytime. Okay. So in this session, we will look into some challenges faced by educators during this MCO period to turn your usual face-to-face classroom activities into an online activities. So, and then we will uncover some tips and examples that somehow may help you in the process of teaching and learning during this pandemic. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna start our session. We've been through this MCO in Malaysia. We've been through this MCO for 4 weeks. So a lot of classes and universities are closed, but most of them are trying to convert them into an online learning. So, but we find that some people have a bit difficulty and challenges that trying to design activities online. So I'll pass this over to Dian. Can you share some pain points that you have, or some of your educator friends have trying to change and transform your usual classroom into an online class?
Okay, thank you, Atikah. As I mentioned before, I'm one of many my fellow colleagues who are not new at online teaching and doing activities online, but probably new at making it fully online. So as educators, we're always trying to improve our students' learning experiences. We're constantly thinking of different ways to make sure the students actually learn. So it's challenging. Well, in the classroom itself, it's challenging because it's always been trial and error approach. Requires time for us to think, to design, and then develop materials for our teaching, and then testing it with our students. So we go into classrooms and then we test it out and we see what works, what doesn't work. With the current situation that we have to do it fully online, that we don't have access to be with the students and see the students, the challenges are getting harder. Conversations with fellow educators, with some friends, of course, we find many struggles. One of it is coming up with learning activities to engage with the students in an online setting that is effective, that is suitable, that works for both the students and us as educators. So we know there are many educational tools. We know there's a lot of applications, tools that can support learning activities. But the tools are only as the means. It's only a way to carry out how to carry out the activities. Our challenge is what are the learning activities that we can adapt in our online teaching. Now, in our practice, some of us may not call it as learning activities. Probably we're used to calling it as tasks or assignments, which actually doubles as assessment that we use to measure students' performance. Now, the pain point is we have these materials. We have it after many trial and error. We have these materials. How can we reuse it? Those tasks and assignments in an online environment. How can we do that with minimal tweaks, minimal adjustments, so that we can start, especially now that we're somehow desperate to do it immediately online. So to start that, how can we reuse and just probably make a few tweaks, and immediately we can use it in our online classroom immediately now. So that's one that's one pain point that is kind of like common in our conversation.
Thank you, Dian. Yeah, I understand that the struggles of coming up with an online activity for us also as a learning designer, for learning, it's not an easy task. We have to do a lot of research. It takes time. It's not an easy task. I agree with you. But yeah, it is something that we can look into. Okay, so before that, let's hear from Kee Man. What about you? What do you have some challenges in turning into online? I know that you have been doing this for quite a while. So how do you find changing into an online classroom? Yes.
I think the adding on to what Dian has mentioned, a lot of educators are actually overwhelmed with so many tools. They often focus too much on the tools. They forgot that the main point is how they need to deliver the content or deliver the activities. So they're so obsessed with the tools until every day trying out so many things, and then in the end they felt very tired and exhausted, trying so many things, learning so many things, but in the end it doesn't really work well. So I think that's one of the pain points that I often get. Another one is when you're teaching online, especially now when you need to do it fully online, there's a lot of guessing games, try and error. I call it like a black box where you try out something, it doesn't work, and then you start to try other things because you can't see the students, and you have to guess a lot whether they understand whatever you have done, or whether they are doing what you want them to do. So a lot of guessing games in online teaching. When you're teaching face to face, you can actually approach them directly and probably observe their behavior, which is a bit lacking in online environment. Even though you do live session like this, web conferencing and all that, you still can't get that presence that you wanted as compared to face to face. I think these two are the main pain points that I normally personally experience, as well as hearing from a lot of educators talking about the same thing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, in a way that the most common challenges is that it's having to use a new tool and then finding out how to use it to make your own activity. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I guess what we're trying to do here today is that how do we align both worlds? How do we align from face-to-face classes and then go into an online classes? So I think what usually happens is that educators tend to put in their work, their contents online, and then expect the students to read it and learn it on their own. But I find that not a good method so much. It works, but I guess in class, you actually have to see the students and then ask them, okay, do you understand this and everything, right? So, so basically we want to find a nice balance to the face-to-face classroom and online classroom. And then doing a conference call like this all the time for a class, I think for some, they might not have the benefit of getting a good internet. So they cannot be online at the same time So how do we help them in terms of this having to convert into an online class? So I guess one benefit to having an online activity is that online class and not doing a con call is that students can work anytime and the teachers can also check anytime, but I guess putting a set timeline so that sometimes the internet works really well in the middle of the night, and the students likes to work in the middle of the night, so they can work on at night, and the teachers can check it when they're done. So that is one benefit of doing this online, right? So yeah. So what about you guys? How do you align both worlds? What benefits can you find when you try to align face-to-face classroom and online classroom? Maybe Kee Man can start first.
I think you know, people always say like, or especially educators often say like, there's no one size fits all. You know, ironically, when you're teaching face to face, you tend to treat everyone, you know, as equal. It's very hard for you to prepare so many types of materials, or so many types of you know, activities to align to different levels of learning or learners' ability. The plus points of having online teaching is that you get to, you know, put up different materials to accommodate different learners. For example, those who are able to connect or well, you can have a live session like this. And then those who can't, you have to have alternative measures like using other tools or even the synchronous method and all that. I think online platform or online learning actually allows you to do a bit more of personalized learning, which you can't really do face to face because of the time, right? And like you mentioned, they can do anytime, anywhere they want. And you know, that gives us a bit more flexibility in encouraging learners to learn. They don't have to attend your class for 3 hours in face-to-face mode, and then that's it, right? And then you try to rush through everything in 3 hours, which is not so conducive in learning. So I think if you look at the plus point of or the good side of online learning is that you can actually tear down this concept of one size fits all and try to accommodate more learners. And then the plus point of having online is that there's so many tools, right? So you can choose the one that fits different types of learners. I think that is one thing that we should look at and try not to think like online learning is a burden to or everyone, and try to embrace the benefit of having it online, you know? I mean, that's my view.
I agree. Okay, what about you, Dian?
I agree. I agree with a lot of things that Kee Man mentioned. Yes, it gives that personalized for the students. It allows this dynamic of, you know, having for them to try different ways, because sometimes even the students don't know the type of what works for them. So it works both ways for the trial and error, the testing of, you know, with online, there's different ways, there are different mechanisms, different tools that they can try out to find out which one works for them. And that's from the student side. From the lecturer side as well. So yes, we do get concerns of, to start off of developing all these different materials and different approach to teaching, to putting it online. It feels like there's a lot more work. But talking with experience and those who are very active of doing it online, some of my seniors have been some professors who have been very, very passionate of doing it online. They say it's just an initial step of doing it. And it is a progressive kind of practice. It's not like you do it one time and everything fits perfectly for an online. So it's a learning process for educators as well. And having that online platform or online classroom allows us to also do experiments as well. So as an educator, you're a researcher as well. So trying to experiment that in online classroom allows us to, you know, be very innovative in a sense to doing the research as well and having that. So online classroom allows that a lot of dynamic of perspective of doing that. But it's worth to acknowledge that one of our concerns
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dian, but I think your mic is muted or something. Still cannot hear you. Not yet. Maybe you can. Okay. Not sure. Okay. Not. Oh,
Does it work?
yes.
Now
Yes,
you
now.
can.
Okay.
And I'll the laptop. So just to repeat, I agree with what Kee Man have said. Yes, online classroom allows that personalized learning from the student's perspective. It allows the students to then also discover what mechanism or what approach works for them as well to learn. Because online learning gives that options. From the educator's point of view, it also allows us to experiment, to experiment and do research on, trying different approach to do it. But some of the pain of classroom, I think one of the main concern of doing this online classroom is the effort. Like Kee Man mentioned, it feels like a burden. Yes, it can feel that way, especially when you're starting. So I myself, in my own personal experience of being a novice online educator, having my courses done fully online, and to start off is very overwhelming. You have one set of materials that you use that works in a classroom, and then in an online, it's not simply just putting in the same materials or the same approach. Talking or getting some inputs from some of more experienced online educators, some professors who are very passionate of doing it online, have said it's only just to start. And then after a while, and it is an ongoing process, just as much as when we prepare for a normal conventional classroom, we always innovate from every semester that we teach. And it takes us several semesters or several iterations of teaching that particular course to be comfortable. So it's the same as doing it online. So it's just getting that first step and starting doing it, and keep pushing it on, and just be in a mindset of doing it as an experiment, doing a research out of it. As educators, we're also researchers. So I think that helps in terms of keeping that motivation. So that's a plus point and like minus point of online classroom as compared to conventional.
I agree. Okay, so let's talk about creating and designing active online activities. So I guess being an educator, having an activity is okay for you guys. Usually, I think how you do activities is that you look into learning outcomes and then you craft your activities from there, right? So like usually by looking at the learning outcomes, you come up with the activities, or like for demonstrate, the learning outcome is for demonstrate something. You have an activity to demonstrate. So that is how you usually create activities, but how do you turn this into an online activity? So I guess my question is that like for a tutorial class, how do you ask the students to demonstrate this? Anybody wants to take this? Kee Man or Dian first?
Okay. Well, again, this is for us to share. And like I mentioned before, we have materials. Learning activities, as you mentioned, we would devise activity, or what we would call it probably tasks or assignments, that we map to measure learning outcomes or learning objectives. Okay, so we've been doing that. So that's well done. So we have these materials, and we've tested it in classrooms. Can we reuse that in an online setting? Quick answer is yes, you can. In my experience of doing it immediately, you can reuse it, but just tweak it a little bit, particularly in formulating questions, trying to use what you already, like the skills that we already have and materials that we have, try to reuse it as much as possible. Now, in my experience, and of course sharing it with other colleagues, one skill that we're very, very good at is formulating questions. We create tutorial questions, we create exam, or we formulate exam questions, quizzes, and all those kind of things. So why not having that and just enriching those questions in that task that we have, and make it much more probably clearer, more specific, more simpler, having more of that questions, and putting it in your online platform. But the key is you have to engage in terms of you have to give feedbacks. So that's the tricky part of doing these questions. Whereas before, in a classroom, same as it would be in a conventional classroom, you would pose the questions and then you would wait for the students to answer, right? And then you can kind of like just jumpstart if they're not responding by probably calling out names and so forth. So the same setting can actually be done in an online classroom. You can use if you're using your institutional LMS, you're using any online platforms that you're comfortable with or your preferences, they all have usually chat functions or comment functions. So use that if you're not comfortable using videos. I myself would prefer having a text, because I know some of my students may not have the same technology capacity as the others. So use things that you can use that you can. The key is to give feedbacks. So use the same questions. So you can have a discussion question, a forum questions that you post, you give some materials, and then you can use the comment sections or the chat functions to then have that interactions with students. So essentially that's reusing what you already have, putting it online, using whatever LMS or online platform that you like, and then use that to interact. You can add more questions. You can prepare questions that you normally would probably have at the back of your hand when you use it in your classroom, post that in your online classroom. And call out students. And if you're using a synchronous way, live, you can set a time, set a date that says, okay, we're going to discuss this for 1 hour, and everyone can be in, and we do that. And I learned that from some of the practitioners, online educator practitioners who shared that. And I find that helpful. I find that works immediately. And feedbacks from students says that, okay, this is doable, Dr. Dian. This is okay. When I asked, is it okay with this? They said it's okay. They find that, they can compile all that interactions, because in its text form, in the comments, they can revisit, or even they can compile that and make it into their notes for references, or for just to get back to it later on. So the message here is saying that you have questions, you have this material, tutorial questions or forum questions, discussion, kind of like protocols, case studies that you use, you have that, you can use it immediately. The key part is just probably add more questions and probably just revisit those questions and try to reformulate those questions to make it much simpler, to make it much more easier to digest, so that you can interact with students. So that is what I think immediately what we can do. And in this situation where if you're not keen on trying to use tools, too many educational tools that's available, at least this is a starting point for those kinds of things.
I agree. Those are good tips. If I may add, I guess how we usually do it on the Open Learning platform is that since the Open Learning platform is usually for synchronous learning, we usually have asked the students to answer questions, and we didn't expect them to answer them right away. So how we do this, if it's a discussion activity, we make sure that the activity is chunk it down, so and then make it by parts. So have it by sequential. If you have like a big questions, make sure that all these questions are shown part by part, because sometimes if you make it one chunk, they only answer the last one. So yeah, the best part, I guess, the best practice for an online learning is that make sure it's small, in a small portion, I guess,
Great.
so that the students understand easily. Okay. Okay. So what about practical or lab work? Kee Man, do
Right.
you want to explain
Can I
this?
share screen?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I see a lot of question about this. I think when we teach online, there's always a concern about having the conversation running, because I know a lot of us, we're so used to having classroom discussion, uh, uh, group discussion and all that in order to drive learning. And we know that in order for learning to happen effectively, we cannot run away from having meaningful tasks and also quality conversation. So how do we encourage quality conversation? Again, we need to forget about quick fix, because I see a lot of people, okay, which tool can do this, which tool can do that. Actually, it depends on your learners, because I can introduce you one tool, and then when you ask your learners, oh, they can't connect to that tool and all that, and then you're wasting your time, right? So the first way to start is to ask your learner first. Let's say I want you to do a discussion. Which platform do you prefer? Say they like WhatsApp or they like Telegram. Then you try to align your task along that particular tools, rather than you introduce them a new tool because they know that they prefer that particular tool. So I think we need to spend more time on what works by asking them more. Um, um, you know, just to wrap up what Sawyer mentioned in the book, the conversation is the driver of group genius. So I know we are so used to face-to-face conversation. When it comes to online, we are so used to that concept of we do the talking and students are not doing any conversation. Actually, they are doing a lot of conversation behind us. They're discussing through their own small WhatsApp group. They're discussing among themselves. They're calling each other, trying to clarify things and all that. These are the things that we don't see. So one way to help us to encourage conversation is to make sure that the discussion is visible. So I think we need to spend a bit of time structuring our course, like what Dian has mentioned. Instead of just simply use the tool, we just have to structure it nicely and then try to find out the best way to deliver the particular content or the particular activity or the particular task, right? So I'm sharing a bit on what I have, adding on to what Dr. Dian has mentioned. This is one example. If you plan your group project like this, and you want them to have like team participation, project management and all that, you should plan the tasks first, right? Like you want them to have a bit of discussion on how to form a team. You want them to have project management stuff and all that. Only then you decide which tool, like I show you here, best fits the purpose, right? And all this you have to discuss with your students. You can't decide immediately. Because if you want to do tool A and then suddenly all of them couldn't access A, then you're wasting your time, right? And you create a lot of problem to them as well. So let's say you want to do team definition of participation. One of the best way is to use social networking tools like social media. They have Facebook, for example. That's one way. Instead of introducing another tool, right? Project management and all that. And you can see the whole process here are governed by communication, because without conversing, without discussing, all this will not work. So again, you have to plan it nicely first before you decide all the small tools inside here. I can't say like, okay, this is going to work for you, this tool is going to work for you, because we don't know what works until you ask your learners and you try it out, right? So
Yeah.
again, we need to run away from the concept of having quick fix. We need to focus more on what works among us. So adding on the, this is one example. We use Padlet a lot, right? If you have not used or heard of Padlet, padlet.com, we often use it for random discussion and all that. So if you group it nicely like this is one example from my class where I have the groups, they do their own discussion and then they post it here, for example. And this can easily done at their own pace. You don't have to force them to meet at one point or wherever. So they can do their discussion and then they post it up, and then they can even chat between them and all that, and start to posting on this Padlet. we are trying to make the conversation visible. I think that's the whole point. Or else we don't know what they're doing behind us, right? They can post a forum answer, but we don't know whether they're really discussing with their peers or with their friends and all that. So making it visible requires us to think about the best tools, right? Another one is, since we talk about WhatsApp and Telegram, I know one problem with WhatsApp and Telegram is the overwhelming thread that you have to scroll. A lot of us forget about hashtag. So I show you one example here. If you ask them to do something, ask them to tag it. It's because when you search the tag, you can list out all the answers or all the feedback immediately. If it's Telegram, then it's automated. It's automated lah in a way. So this is one way to help conversation running without having to use too many new tools that they may not be familiar with. Last one on psychomotor skills. Before I pass to Dian. This is the common question. How do we teach psychomotor skills online? I have a few readings that I've done, and then one particular journal article that I find it interesting is this one. You can Google up later. This particular article. They actually summarize the best way to teach all these psychomotor skills online, and one of the uh, measure or method that they use is using task analysis and with visualization or verbalization. What they did was they reverse engineer. Normally in the lab work, you will ask the student to do it, and then you observe them, or they ask their friend to observe, and then do some recording and all that. What happened is you can always reverse engineer. You show them a proper way of doing it, right? And ask them to do analysis, what is wrong with the step, what is supposed to be done first and all that. So don't try to teach everything in one whole go. Try to chunk it out and then try to do a bit of analysis and then do visualization. They can always redraw, draw the step, do some verbalization. Maybe they can share like 1-minute video of whatever they have learned from the process and all that, a bit of reverse engineering, right? I have a case here. I found this on TikTok. Even though TikTok is normally negative, but I found it quite interesting to see that some doctors and some educators are using it to teach the skills and psychomotor skills. What happened was they demonstrate the right way and ask students to post their way of doing it using whatever tools they have at home. So they may not have this tool, for example, but they can always easily find something to replace it, to kind of do like a mock demonstration and to show that they can do it, right? And another example, last one is this one. We talk about ventilators, right? And how costly it is and all that. So if you do task analysis doing the reverse engineering way, you'll be surprised with the outcome like this one. You can see like type 1, type 2, type 3, different types of ventilators. And you'll be surprised with the output that the student can get using whatever resources they have at home. And all you have to do is to encourage them to think backward lah, in a way. Don't be too bogged down about you telling them this is the way to do it, and then they can't do it, and then you start to be a bit negative about the responses, right? So I'm going to pass to Dr. Dian if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I quite like and agree with the model that you showed, that you shared, of designing it first and having that design first without thinking about the tools. And like you mentioned, and of course again conversations with other colleagues as well, coming from an IT background, when people say, oh, there's this tool or there's this app, it's really good for the students. For us, we think, oh, it's just another tool, it's just another app. And when you focus on that, only that, and I remember when we were introduced of using Kahoot as an app, nothing wrong with Kahoot, it works, it's really fun, the students enjoy it, but after a while, the charm wears off. Right. The charm wears off where the student says, oh, another Kahoot.
Not again.
Oh, again, or not again. So that shows that the tool is not a problem. It's how you design. So the questioning, the actual design of the activity that you need to think about. So that is the challenge now, that we are forced to think again as to what we want the activity to be. And that's why coming back to what we are discussing, the point that we're discussing now is that try to look at the activity free from the tools first. and then having that, and then just use use tools if you prefer, or any mechanism that you are comfortable with, to test it out, and then see what works, what doesn't work, and then move forward from that. I think the message here is to start, use as what you have, tweak it, and then move and innovate, move forward from that and innovate more as we go along. And we can foresee that the online, the practice now that we are doing for the online classroom, the full online classroom, is going to be there for the near future. I mean, like, we're not going to, I don't think we are going to revert back fully to classroom anytime soon. We don't have that luxury anytime soon. So I think just keep moving forward. And the first step is just design it first. Just look back at what you have, just put it in visually, and then see, and then try to figure out what tools to use. So I do like the models that you share. And I do like about what you mentioned about for the psychomotor thing. Yes, we do have a lot of questions and a lot of discussion on saying that, how can we do that online when we can't see it, when it has to be done in a lab, has to be done mechanically. So how can we do that? So that is an idea that I think would be helpful for those teaching those types of courses or fields.
Great. Thank you, guys. Those are great tips and examples, but I think we're a bit out of time. So we're going to take some questions from the
Q&A.
Yes, the Q&A. So we have one question from Abdul Jalil Muhammad. What is the actual obstacle for successfully online learning? Okay, so anybody want to take this? I'll repeat. What's the obstacle for successfully online learning? Maybe Kee Man wants to answer this.
I think the common answer will be accessibility, right? I mean, whether your learners are able to be, to get connected, and that would be one issue. Another one is whether we as educators are ready to experiment, to try out more things, to actually consider learners' point of view in doing our design. Because I notice we tend to be so obsessed with our way of doing it, and when the learners are not able to fit into what we want them to do, we get very frustrated without knowing that they actually have a lot of problems to even get connected to certain tools. So I think the conversation has to be done earlier, in an earlier stage. Talk to your students, get to know them, whether they can access this particular tool or not, and then you plan your lesson along the line, rather than trying to force into a new tools.
Yeah,
Again?
I agree. I agree with Kee Man of having that conversation with all parties that's involved in when you transform that. From that, then you can get the gauge of what will work and will not work for your online teaching or in your online classroom. When we talk about obstacles, like different angles, different perspectives, different stakeholders will have different barriers or constraints. So having that conversation first to figure out what are the issues that they all face, and then you can come up with a solution that works for that. I agree. Sometimes we forget to ask the students what works and what doesn't work, because we take it very seriously that it's our responsibility. That particular classroom is our responsibility when it's not yours alone. When it's an online setting, it's not yours alone. So a lot of things, the students, the educators, the platform, the providers itself needs to be stable in order to facilitate and support that learning, that arrangement. So yeah, so that is my take.
Okay, thank you. Kee Man, we have quite a number of people asking what tools, online tools for of teaching do you use actually? So maybe you can give some that you commonly use.
Yeah, quite a number. I think if you want to focus on conversation, then of course you have to kind of change it to text mode a bit, rather than using the normal audio base, because I think students have problems sometimes. So like, for example, Padlet is a good platform, easy to use, very user-friendly, padlet.com. There's also other tools like Wiklet for you to curate your materials and let students give feedback. I think there's so many tools actually. If you want, you can always go to Google and type e-learning ZEF, Z-E-E-F. I have a whole list of curated tools for different purposes if you want it. But my point here is tools are just tools. You still have to try it out. And then, okay, if you are comfortable with it, then chances are you are more confident of using it, then you can, go with that particular tool. Like for example, Zoom, right? People are having so many feedback about Zoom, but some of them have not even tried it. But
Yeah.
they listen to a lot of people, Zoom is negative, so they don't use it. But when they try it out, hey, Zoom is quite nice. I think until you use it and try to discover how it can help you to deliver what you plan to do, I think that is the eureka moment. Ding, this is what I need. So yeah, I can't really list all the tools. Actually, there's so many, but the
Yeah.
common one I use is the easiest one would be Padlet, Wakelet. What else? Google Classroom is a good way as well, actually, because it's quite friendly. It doesn't really use a lot of bandwidth. If you want to deal with slightly more, funky or cool stuff, you can try Class Dojo, ClassDojo. That's quite nice because it has gamified elements inside where students can get points for doing something. I mean, that's a bit funky, but again, it requires a bit of bandwidth. So I think you can try to discover all these tools as you go along. Again, if you have an LMS, then might as well use the LMS as well. Try to take
Yeah.
advantage of your tools in the LMS, right? Like for
Yeah.
example, if you're using Open Learning, you might want to take a look at the tools available in Open Learning rather than trying to introduce new tools. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Dian?
Yeah. I agree with, we have resources that we've been using. Like I mentioned, online learning or online classroom is not totally new. It says that we may not have adapted to it fully, like 100% how we are forced to do now. So we have LMS, we have, like you mentioned, Google Classroom. If your institution is subscribed to Google tools, so you have that access to use that. So you can try out to use the resources that you already have that probably have in institution-wide, you have support for it. So for example, your own institution LMS, you have probably the IT team to support if you have issues with that. So use that, can make it easier in terms of lessen the frustration of that learning curve of learning different tools, because it can be overwhelming trying to figure it out, trying to figure the technical aspect of it. Like in my experience, I tried to, because I went to some workshop that they shared about using a tool, and I tried to use it. I said, okay, this is fun. I can use this. And I posted it in my LMS, and I said to my students, okay, please try this. This is our first time. And then they try it out. And then they say, Dr. Dian, I can't save my answer. How do I do it? And then I myself did not experience the whole doing it. I can't give that support to my students. So I think, and that can be frustrating, like Kee Man says, that can be frustrating because the students can't do what I expect them to do. So when that happens, try to, okay, now be strategic about it and use resources that we have support and use that first, and then, build up from there and try to expand and explore others.
You might want to also flip the table sometimes, like what I did. Sometimes I ask the students, do you know any tools that we can use? Sometimes they know more tools than us. I learned some new tools from my students as well. So I think that would be another way.
Yeah. So, true enough. So that's why I said it's important when it's an online classroom and we want to transform that. It's very, very crucial that we communicate and we engage and do that pre-work before transforming it with all parties that's involved in that setting. So that helps, at least in terms of the preparation, in terms of the development and so forth.
Okay, right. So we also have a question, a number of questions about accessibility for students in countries like India. where they have low bandwidth. So maybe you can share some strategies on how to overcome this. I've mentioned that using con call like this is not a good way, but maybe you have more tips on how to overcome this.
Dian,
And maybe Dian wants to share.
Yeah, so like Kee Man mentioned, text seems to be one of the lowest form of tech that we can use. So if like bandwidth is a very major issue, then we try to use that to our advantage as much as possible using text, of chatting. Chances are these students are in some form of social communication, social platform like WhatsApp or Telegrams, or even your own LMS that they get access to, because they have to use that as an official kind of like platform for their institution, and use those, like I mentioned, use those chat functions, those text discussion functions, those comment features, and those kind of things. So that helps. It's not ideal. It may not be effective for all students, but at least it helps. At least it works for majority of students who may not have like issues. Yes. Or as I think the last webinar with Prof. Karim says, then probably we can revert back to non-tech approach, pen and paper type of approach for distance learning. I remember we can go back to that, because the idea, I think the objective is students learn.
Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. Yes, Kee Man?
No, I mean, if you're talking about extreme problem, as in they are totally disconnected, then of course, to me, those are outliers, and you might want to probably give them a call and try to see what are the possible ways to engage them. Sometimes they say they have very poor connection, but they can still receive text. So perhaps like what Dr. Dian mentioned, if you know that, then you can send them some text-based material for them to work on, and then reply using text and all that, instead of using live classes or web conferences like this. But if they're totally disconnected, then I think you have to figure out using the the old way lah, by postage maybe. I mean, I don't know how difficult it is. Like in my case in Sarawak, Borneo, we have students who have no connection at all because there's no network. So what happened is occasionally they have to climb a hill, trying to get the best network, and then try to download everything, and then they go back home. So if you know that you are doing that, for example, I'll be telling them, I'll call them, or I'll just send an SMS. I say, okay, I'll be uploading today, so you can upload anytime this week. So when you're free, so when you go out to buy grocery, like now during lockdown, so when they go out, they immediately download everything, and then they go back, they try to do everything, and then when they go out again, they upload, or they send it through whatever means they can. So I think, again, the conversation between the students is really crucial. It's not good to have that kind of assumption like, oh, my students cannot get connected without even asking them. You might not know, they are trying hard to get connected as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've mentioned this, like we don't know how the students are trying to get connected. So it's best to have activities and contents where they can access anytime they wanted to, right? So try not to use something where they have to connect at the same time. Everybody has to connect at the same time. I know some of you might be worried about attendance, but this can be achieved by all the activities that they have done. So when they have done the activities, you can check the attendance during that time instead.
Agree. Yeah. I think we as educators, because times are different, because the conditions are different, flexibility in the management of the course, because you mentioned about attendance, we don't have, I mean, like the setting is not the same as in classroom, or even in an online setting where the students are in campus, and not right now where they have to be at their own homes, and they, that may have different infrastructure setting. be flexible in that. Re-strategize and adapt to what you need to do. Be clear with the objective of what you want to achieve in handling and conducting that online classroom. I think that's important to make sure that you bear in mind and revisit again and again with all the initiatives that we do in our teaching, especially online teaching.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So in a way, all that matters is that your students are getting what they wanted. You as an educator is somebody you want to cater to their difficulties. You want to give to them all this education, all this knowledge, but you have to think about them first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to take one last question because we have quite a number of people asking about practical classes like biology and stuff. So Kee Man has mentioned this in his slide, but maybe we can recap it again on how you can do this, like medical students, biology, where they have to go to labs and all. How do they do this? Yeah.
It's really a tough time to do lab work because, for example, if you are doing chemical lab work and all that, they can't get access to all the tools and also the chemicals and all that. So how do you expect them to conduct certain experiment, right, without having all those tools? I think if you are able to replace all those chemicals, for example, or all the tools with something which is close to their home, for example, using available resources at home, and try to experiment something which also achieve the same effect or the same outcome, then that would be one way to replace it. For example, like I showed you just now, doing the ventilators and all that, and how to do intubation and all that. So they may not have the exact tool, but you tell them to use perhaps something to replace it, and they know that that thing represents something else. It's something like a visualization of the actual tool because you don't have it at home, to kind of mock or simulate the actual practical lab and all that. So I think that's one way. But if your lab work requires a lot of technical things, then I think you just have to kind of like forget about it for a while and try to figure out other things like doing some analysis of the actual way of doing it first before they do the hands-on. I think that one you have to leave it until the time permits, I think. Yeah. But Dian?
Yeah, I agree. You can't replace 100%
Yep.
And have it like what you would. I mean, like psychomotor is something that the students need to experience. The learners need to experience and actually doing it hands-on. So you can't replace that fully online. So I think bear in mind that that is the limitation of online. What they can do, as what Kee Man mentioned, you can simulate, you can reflect on, at least at that sense in the online setting, is they get the knowledge. They may not have the experience, but they get the knowledge. They get the information, okay, as to what the reactions or whatever that is, they should be experiencing it when they do it hands-on. So in the moment where using online classroom is, at least they get the knowledge first, and having that hands-on when all of this is over and you do get to go back and have that setting back, that hands-on setting back, then that can be done at that point. So it's a matter of, if you're teaching or in your field of course is very, very practical, this is the time where you have to re-strategize and redesign the entire course of now designing it for them to get the knowledge first. Whereas probably in the normal conventional, when in previous times when we don't have this problem, the situation that we have now, where they can, as you hands-on, that you get the knowledge. As you experience it, then you learn. Now, unfortunately, that's not possible now. So re-strategizing that, so that requires a little bit of creativity, that requires a little bit more work probably than other fields that doesn't require that is not critical to have that psychomotor skills developed. So that adjustment is quite.
There are quite a number of YouTube channels that actually do experiment using daily life materials. So if you notice that those are, relevant to yours, that you normally use lab tools, and then suddenly this guy is using all this home-based stuff, then you might want to replicate that particular task and let the student try it out as well. I think now we are blessed with so many useful materials on YouTube. People keep on sharing things. So you might want to do a bit of work to do some checking and see, okay, this guy is using plastic bottles and cola to do some experiment, which I can use it in my class, instead of using the normal chemicals in the lab. So something for you to think about if you really want to do it, to allow a student to try it out at home. They may not be able to record the whole session, but at least they experience the experiment and then try to report to you, okay, this works and this doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. So I think that would encourage them to try out something while, holding on the excitement to try the real thing. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess before we wrap things up, a few tips I want to talk about is that try and error, it's fine. You when designing an activity, you won't get the best result on the first time. Try and error all the time. You ask your students for feedbacks. Don't worry if the first time still have flaws, and it's best try to mimic your classroom, so that ask the students to have discussions, have them to interact, like using Padlet. Padlet is a really great tool. You can actually have discussions in there, ask them to discuss in there, share their ideas and everything. So lastly is that think of the students. Like I said, students comes in the class. You have to think about the students' priority first. Even though you are the educator, you want to give out all this information to the students. So the students are the priority here. Before I close up, thank you, Kee Man and Dian. We do have a lot more questions, but because we're lack of time, we cannot take this today. But fret not, we do have a session tomorrow, a live Q&A session. Sorry. We do have a live Q&A session tomorrow, the same time. You can, You can sign up and register for this session tomorrow, where we'll be answering all the questions that we cannot answer today, as we have lack of time. And also, you can get in touch with us. We have more future sessions. We'll be running Tanya OL or Ask OL for every month as a support channel for educators on different topics. So if you have any learning design related questions, please let us know via the Tanya OL form, and we will try our best to answer them. You can also reach out to me and my team directly via email. Or if you have technical or sales related question, you can reach our customer success or sales team. At Open Learning, we are aware of that these are challenging times, and we are committed to supporting you in any way we can. We will share more about our COVID-19 response and offers with you. We've included the links to everything that I mentioned here in the chat box, and we will also email it to you as well after this webinar. We will also be including all the resources that we've discussed today. So don't worry, for those asking about Kee Man's slides, we will share with you along with the webinar recording in the follow-up email. To everybody, thank you for everybody attending this session. Thank you by being our guests, and thank you to our guest speakers For those who have registered for our session tomorrow, see you all tomorrow in the Tanya OL session. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Yep.
Okay.